In this lesson, we're going to take a look at exporting our animated GIFs, and it should go out without saying that when you're actually doing this reel for a client or for yourself, for instance, you're going to want to save each one of these animations as PDF files, or PSD files rather. That way, if you need to make an adjustment, whether it be for split testing or the client requests a change, everything will be maintained here. Otherwise, the animated GIF, it loses all that information. So, going back here, if we go to our first animation that we created and go to File, Save for Web, as I said, the most important thing to pay attention to if you're designing an animated banner set for a client or yourself is the file size limits. So AdWords, for instance, I believe the file size cannot be greater than 50 kilobytes. So that means we would have a problem with this one right here. As we see, it's 69K. So there, as I mentioned in the previous lesson, if we can change the file size in several different ways. So we have all these options up here. Now this will affect the quality, but you have a preview right here that will show you whether it is acceptable or not. So it's basically a trade-off. So if we change the colors, for instance, down to 128, we see a slight improvement in the file size, but not enough. We could also change and play around with the dither, which we could see that changes it quite a bit. We could play with this, although if it goes from interlace to not, we can see it does slightly change it, but not too much, the file size and the quality. But one of the best ways I would say to export these banners so that they're underneath the file size limit would be to play around with the animation timeline. So fewer frames and less tweening in animation obviously means less file size. So as I mentioned before, if we set the timeline frame rate from 30, say down to 20, and we go to Save for Web, we'll see that we're almost there right off the bat, where it was 67 before, but now it's 53. So one of the things, like I said, we could do is just change this down to 128, and now we're underneath 50, and it still looks good. So for looping options, obviously you're going to want to set to forever almost all the time, and then just go ahead and save it as the GIF. So if we go through some of these other ones, let's look at this one for instance. If we go to Save for Web, we're perfect actually, 46, because in this one we did adjust the timeline frame rate. Now this one again is 66. Now let me just preview this real quick. We'll see that it's really smooth in how it animates. If we change the timeline frame rate down to 20, we'll see it's not quite as smooth, but that's not really a huge deal. It still does animate and it catches people's eye. We're still not quite there, so we could probably change that down to 128. And now we're at 47. And then finally this one, we're perfect in being right at 47. So just to quickly recap, the way we can get these under appropriate levels is through changing these options up here and also changing the animation in the timeline. Real quick, if this is one way that you can do it and changing it down to 20 or a different frame rate. The other way, additionally, would be to make these keyframes closer together and lesser in length, and that will also help you be able to save these and stay underneath the certain required file size. And so that is it for this chapter. In the next, we're going to take a look at how we can take the whole process that we just went through and try to automate it as much as possible. All right, I'll see you then.